welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to Syosset Public Library's official podcast, Turn the Page. I am very excited that we have our special guest with us here today, Betty Culley, who is the author of The Name She Gave Me. And we are going to be talking about that today. And I absolutely love this book. I love that you wrote it in verse. I thought it was such a breath of fresh air. It touched on so many different topics that are so important. And it could be read, it's for a young adult audience.
Yes, it's published through Harper Teen, who publishes young adult, but I have heard that a lot of young adult books are enjoyed by adults too.
I was just gonna say a young adult and an adult, like those ages, you would get so much out of this book. There's so much to say about it. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself before we talk about the book.
Sure. I saw that you're in Syosset, and I actually I've lived in Maine my whole adult life, but I grew up in Hicksville.
So very close. Yeah.
Very close on Long Island. And I came to Maine as an adult. So I've lived my whole grown up life here. And I live on 85 acres in a small town, kind of out in the woods, and grow crab apples and have a big garden. And I also worked as a nurse, a home health nurse, and a pediatric home health nurse, and a labor and delivery nurse in local hospitals.
Oh, wow. So I could definitely see aspects of like what you bring from your real life into the story, because the character in the book, Rynn, she ends up living on a garlic farm.
Yes.
In the story. So like you have so much, you said you have 85 acres.
Yes. And we do grow garlic. So I was able to have some real life experiences. And actually, when I was writing the book, I went to a local fair, Common Ground Fair they have every year. And there were garlic farmers there that brought all their different varieties, and we had always planted the same variety. So I was taking pictures and buying some of each garlic, which some of those ended up in the novel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I learned so much about like different gardening and different things that I didn't even know about, like just from reading the story. I didn't expect it to necessarily touch upon that, because there's so much going on in the book with the main character, Rynn, who's actually, her first name was Scheherazade when she was first born. And then when she was adopted by her family, they changed her name to Rynn. And then she ends up on the garlic farm. I see like garlic is kind of like a symbolic aspect of this story. What was your inspiration point like?
Well, garlic, you plant garlic, and I think at one point in the book, Rynn talks about how you plant garlic in the fall, and it survives all winter underneath the ground, kind of like a bulb, and then it grows again in the spring. It's actually, if my computer was turned a little, you would see our garlic, which is about a foot high. It's one of the first green things that comes up in the spring. So it's kind of like almost like it survived, and Rynn has to survive in her way, or tries to. So
yeah, Rynn, she's definitely a survivor. Like it's not easy for her. She also has a heart condition. She literally has a hole in her heart that had to be corrected, and she had different biological parents, and then she gets adopted. So she's dealing with adoption issues with this, which is an issue a lot of people, deal with, like, their identity, and like she deals with that in the story. So that, like, she really goes through a lot, like health wise, and also like in her life. Was Rynn an inspiration point, like a character inspiration point, did you have for that character?
Well, I wanted to write a story that showed a point of view maybe about adoption and that I had never read about when I was growing up, and I was adopted and I was in foster care, and I'd never really, I love to read, but I never read a character that really felt like it was my reality or my story. And so though Rynn's story, her facts are different than mine, but I think that was my inspiration to tell the truth about, at least for her character, the truth of her experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so genuine to me. Like I really felt like I was reading someone's, personal story. And I didn't read an adoption story like this before. And it's just so heartfelt, and like you really feel for her so much. Like you really feel like I know her, like, I know someone like her, I really do feel like that with her character. And I loved how you wrote from her perspective.
I appreciate that you say that, because when you write and you put out a story, you don't know how people are going to react to it, and that makes me happy.
Oh yeah, I absolutely, yeah, I really love this story, because each of the characters, I would say, they're dynamic. Like I always like to read a story where, the characters learn or change, through something, because that's like in real life, like people don't stay the same always, like things are constantly changing around us and we can't always affect that change. So I think, that definitely Rynn's story is, one of change, and like it has sad parts to it, but there's also like so much life, in her story with the gardening too, and with the growing, like there's a lot of like life to the story. And she deals with a difficult relationship with her mother. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to show is that just like in with people who aren't adopted, you don't have to be adopted to have had a difficult experience with someone in your life, or a family member, or even not a family member. And I wanted to show how difficult it could be, especially for a child. Even though she's 16, children younger than her age also deal with difficult situations, and children in a lot of ways, I think, are helpless, or they feel helpless, or they don't always know what they can do to deal with the situation. They may think it's their fault, or they may think there's something they can do to make it better. And Rynn's mother is a difficult person for her to deal with, but I also didn't want it to be black and white, where we didn't understand that Rynn's mother also had things that she was dealing with.
And you can definitely see that, like it's not black and white. Like you wrote the characters, how they're dynamic. Like you can see that the mother really does care, deep down for her very deeply, but she's trying to have a relationship with her daughter, and her daughter's going through a lot, and that's what causes the conflict too, sometimes. And it doesn't have to be something, always big and great. It's just like little things sometimes that just build up. And I think you did a great job, telling that story.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I think the little things can be more telling than the big things.
Yeah, absolutely, because you build up the story, and you don't need, big things to like overrun the story. It's just like these small things that you learn about the characters that, over the course of the book, like you can see the changes in how they're growing too. So, and I love the chapters are not overwhelming, like especially for a teen or an adult reader. It's so accessible, like, because what I find so hard sometimes, you're reading a story and there's so much depth to it and you have all these things going on, but being written in verse, I feel like it makes it very accessible to people.
Yes, I think so. I think it's more immediate and just more space on the page, even for your mind to take a minute to think about things.
And then Rynn discovers that she has a younger sister in a nearby town.
Yeah.
And that's when things, really shift in the story. That it becomes, it's so heartfelt, like, and then she develops this friendship with the boy.
Oh, Alexander.
Alexander. Yeah, I thought that was so sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. They help each other in a way with they each give each other insight from that, I think, from their own life experiences. So Rynn looks at things differently from listening to or hearing Alexander's ideas, and Alexander and she helps him too, that's kind of what friends do.
Yeah,
right?
I think Rynn is a great friend. She's also a great listener, I think, too. So I think that being from her perspective, like we still get a lot from the other characters because I really think she does listen to the others. She's very like introspective. Like I feel like she thinks a lot through her head through things. So
Yeah.
did you ever have, when you were writing this, did it always start out from her perspective or did you shift that at some point? When did you know you wanted to write from her perspective?
Well, my other verse novel, that the first one that I wrote, Three Things I Know Are True, is from a girl's perspective whose brother was injured in an accidental shooting, and that was from her point of view. And I think I knew from the beginning because especially with verse, it's very immediate and you don't have as many words. I actually, like if my book was, twice as long, it would be so big that it would, it would be like just too big a book. And so I think making it in verse just comes to the point easier. So I always knew I would do it in verse and do it from Rynn's point of view. But then Sorella, that kind of surprised me, but I realized that was the best way for the readers to get to know her sister would to be to hear Sorella's voice.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because all these characters, like, they're so nuanced. Like, we learn new things throughout the story about them. And it's just like, it's such an important story. What do you want readers to take away from this book?
Well, the thing that surprised me when my first book came out was, you write a book and you have an idea sort of what it's about. You hope you do. And then people took things from the book that I didn't even realize maybe were there. And I think everybody takes from a book what they need and things that are important to them. So I hope that every reader finds something in the book that means something to them.
And I think,
don't know what that might be.
I know, I think there's so many things that different readers can get from this, this story, especially like, if you've had a heart condition, if you've been adopted, if you're dealing with some relationship issues, if you're dealing with friendships, like you're going through those teenage years of just navigating through, and even like the part about the garden. I think that that's so interesting about people, I think that they would like that too, about learning about the farm. I thought that was so cool. That you combined all those things together. Yeah. Do you have a favorite character from the story?
Well, I think Rynn and Sorella are probably my favorites, of course. But I like Martha too, because Martha is Sorella's foster mother, because I feel like she sort of embodies what a good parent, or an understanding person, how they are. And I like her best friend's brother Terrence, just because he's kind of funny and understanding in his own way. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely like Rynn is my favorite character because I just thought that she was so relatable in the teenage years, and she's just going through a lot. But I feel like that, she keeps like a steadiness to herself. And I think that she listens very well. And, I think she just has a deep, love for people too.
yeah.
And I thought that, again, it's just such a sweet story. Like I can't say enough good things about it. As you can tell.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And do you ever plan to write another story with these characters again?
I don't. I don't right now, but who knows, right? I don't. I know it's kind of left it up a little bit in the end. Some things are up in the air a little bit, but I feel like the reader knows that Rynn will be okay.
Yeah, I think that was a great takeaway from this book, because you like to have, you don't want to have a feeling of helplessness. And I think that this is a great story right now, because I think for people are looking for tales of hope. And I think that we don't have enough of that. Like we have a lot of black and white in literature, and it's like finding those books that just incorporate everything, about the human experience, like, but do it in a way that's accessible to readers. Like, I can't think of many examples of that, and like telling it in a way where you want to keep reading it. Like I couldn't put it down. So yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to give hope and show that there's a way out of hard things, that it might not be easy, but people can do it. A teenager can do it, an adult can do it. It can happen.
And I think from going through a pandemic and still dealing with, issues of the pandemic, even if it becomes an endemic now, like we're still dealing with, issues of communication and, dealing with people. So this is like the perfect book for right now for people to pick up, and I, enjoyed it. It's like it's a timely story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And what do you really like about this book right now that's different than your other stories you had written, one other book? Like, what do you think that you wanted to incorporate into this story that you hadn't tried before in your other writing?
Well, I hadn't incorporated two voices. This is the first time I'd incorporated two voices, and I really enjoyed putting Sorella's voice out there. And I don't know that you see that a lot in young adult, but I think that I thought it was fun, and I thought it gave you a sense of who she was and why Rynn cared about her, and you understood her more. So that was a new thing for me, doing the two voices.
Yeah, I think having two is great, because sometimes you have so many, and then it's like you're bouncing back and forth, and you're trying to figure out like which character is speaking now, like but you could really focus on the characters. I think that it's important. You really knew Rynn, you really knew Sorella, like you really knew Martha, you really knew the other characters, because like there weren't so many that you had to keep track of too. Like I appreciated that, also.
Yes.
And are you reading anything right now that you're really loving? We always kind of ask that question.
Oh, that's a great question. I read actually, it was an adult book that sort of had a little bit of an adoption theme in my mind. See, I read it and I took that from it. It's called Clara and the Sun, and it's an adult book, but it's about a robot that's built to be a friend, and it's waiting in the beginning. It's waiting in the store for a child to come and pick it, and then it goes home with the child and becomes the child's friend sort of until the child outgrows it. And that was a very bittersweet, beautiful, beautiful story, because it had a lot about, friendship and children and parenting and things like that.
Oh, wow. That sounds really unique. Like, so it was written for adults?
It was written for adults, but I think teenagers would also enjoy it.
One of my favorite books I had read recently, and I had a book discussion with, it's a little bit of an older book, but it's The Wild Robot by Peter Brown.
Oh,
yeah, if you're familiar with that story.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah,
Yes.
the robot adopts the little duck or quail. I'm trying to think of on the island, and then you meet all the animals, and like it's just the forces of nature against technology. Like, I think that's a great story too. It's written for children, but I think adults would appreciate it too.
I think, is there a second one, The Wild Robot Escaped?
Yes.
Because
yes.
I just read that one, and I love that one too.
Yeah. And that's a different, you get to see the farm, the farm setting. So that was fun too. And I like in that book also, like the chapters are really short, but you get to know the characters so well. Yeah, I like books with like shorter chapters and like different ways of telling the story instead of sometimes you get these like really long-winded books. But I love books like that too, that deal with some aspect of technology and how we're dealing with it with identity too. So that seems to be another theme, too. And it also has the adoption aspect with like, the robot is trying to take care of, like really genuinely loves this animal. So, and a lot of stories with family. So I think that that's also very timely too. Was there something else that you wanted to touch upon with the story that we haven't talked about yet?
No, just that I appreciate every reader, and I hope people will enjoy it. And I thank anybody who takes the time to read the book, and I appreciate that.
Oh, it's definitely time worth spent. I enjoyed reading about these characters, and you're really reading through them because you get such wonderful perspectives, of those two characters and how they're different, but they share a bond, and it's really loving. And I think that there's great, dynamic characters, and there's so much to say in this story. Again, about adoption, identity, like, a young adult reader would love this, an adult reader. I think there's so many things that people can see in the characters, see in themselves, like, because it really touches on everyone. Like, I don't know anyone that wouldn't get something out of this story. And I think that that's rare. So I'm going to be recommending it to my friends. I think my friends would absolutely love this.
I'll add that, that the dedication to anyone searching for their true home, wherever that may be, and that's maybe sort of sums up a little bit, my hopes for people, that they find the place, where they feel at home, that feels right for them.
Yeah, I think that that's so beautiful. And even the cover, I love the cover. Whoever did the cover art, like, I think that that's so beautiful, because I was looking at it and I just saw the color, and then I'm like, oh, that's the garlic plant, and how you explained like how it blooms. It's the first to bloom in the spring.
Yes.
Is that correct? And then then you see the leaves.
Yes, it starts growing.
And it's deep down inside. So it's like, it's like that's home. That's like where you feel settled and inside. So that's really beautiful, that like that symbolism of that, like, oh, it's such a beautiful story. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today virtually, and for anyone listening, or go to your local bookstore and check it out, because it's a wonderful book, and I'm so glad I got to take the time to sit down with you today. And thank you for writing this.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, thank you. It was such a treat. So we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page. I am children's librarian Meghan, and I have here with me the author Betty Culley, author of The Name She Gave Me, which is going to be released on June 21st. So check that book out. And that is concluding our chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.